Get started. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us for our workshop this afternoon. My name is Chris Stevens. I'm a career coach with Career Catchers, which is a nonprofit organization here in Montgomery County. We are partnered with the Ignite Hub at Montgomery College to provide this workshop today. I'm joined here by my colleague Anthony. A little more at the end of the presentation about what Career Catchers and the Ignite Hub offers. So we do have a hybrid format for this workshop, and we do want it to be interactive. So if you have any comments, questions, if you're here in person, you can raise your hand and for any questions. If you're on Zoom, feel free to unmute yourself or use the hand raise icon, and we will address your comment as that comes through. You can also feel free to put things in the chat. So once again, thank you for taking time out of your day, and we'll go ahead and get started. So today's topic is on job search strategies. But whenever I do this workshop, I like to call it the job of finding a job. And that's because, a lot of times when you're looking for a job, it's, it can feel like that's a whole job in and of itself, right? A full-time job. You're putting in a lot of time, effort, commitment, similar to what you'd be doing if you were working. And, the job search can be pretty overwhelming. So hopefully, by the end of this session, we'll go through some different tips and tricks and guidance that can help you, hopefully work through your job search a little more effectively and with a little more confidence. I also do want to make sure to say that, the information that we're going over today isn't necessarily going to be, it isn't just for people who are, looking for their first job or just getting into the workforce. The things we go over today are, I would say, relevant to anyone, no matter where you are in your sort of career journey. Whether you're just starting out, whether you're, working and looking to transfer to a different career field, whether you're sort of already established and kind of, looking towards the long-term goals. All of this is good information to sort of have in mind, no matter where you are. I do also want to point out before we get started that this session is being recorded. At the end, everyone will get a copy of this recording as well as a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. So, let's get started. I want to put a question out to everyone first of all. So, again, no matter sort of where you are in your career journey, what's been your experience with the job search? Could be good, could be bad, but does anyone have any sort of thoughts or experiences they'd like to share about that? A lot of ghosting. Yep, that is a pretty common complaint, and fair enough, absolutely. It's frustrating. What else?
We expect to have something that coming out of school or fresh has to be right.
Yeah. Sometimes you see that, sort of an entry-level job, they want experience for entry-level jobs, and that can be kind of confusing, right? How do you get experience in a first job, right? You get your first job to get that experience. Yeah, absolutely. We have something in the chat here. Okay, yeah, so sort of specific job strategies using LinkedIn and Indeed to find jobs. Yep, absolutely. Those are two sort of tools that we'll go over a little bit today. And it's overwhelming at times. Absolutely. I think that's probably the thing that a lot of people feel is this is pretty overwhelming. And there is sort of good reason for that. So, these are a few sort of stats. According to, I think it's Indeed, there are an average, at least, through Indeed, of 36,000 job postings every week. I think this information is fairly recent, but that's always changing, and of course, different economic conditions so on influence that. But let's use this number. Almost 40,000 job postings that you can find, and of those, we'll call them available jobs, right? Only 15% or so are found sort of exclusively by applying through like a job board, right? Through a job, sort of completing a job application and just leaving it at that. Applying through Indeed, just submitting an application is a strategy and one that you're going to be doing, regardless, right? You have to apply for a job at some point. But if that's all you're doing, your odds may not be that great. In contrast, uh, there's one stat that says 85, approximately 85% of jobs are sort of obtained through networking of one sort or another. And I know that can sound overwhelming. We'll get to networking a little bit, but the main takeaway here isn't so much to discourage you, but it's sort of a reality check, right? For a lot of these jobs, there may be hundreds of people applying for each role. So how do you stand out? And basically the trick and what we're going to talk about today is, using a few different search methods and, really sort of tailoring yourself and your experience, to really maximize your opportunities and do your best to stand out. So, while this is, can feel overwhelming, there are a lot of opportunities here as well. As long as you're willing to sort of put in the preparation and the work. Comments or questions on this? All right. So when you're first starting your job search, a lot of times, the instinct may be to rush right to a resume or a job application or something like that, and just get started there. And that's fine, but I would say that the very first step of a job search is actually self-assessment, right? You're not looking at sort of what's out there, you're looking at yourself first. You have to, in order to have an effective job search, you need to know what you're looking for, right? Sure, you can apply to any job that sort of comes across your screen, on Indeed or whatever. But these, if that's your strategy, these may be jobs that you're not especially interested in, or may not be, sort of qualified for. So it's worth doing a little bit of preparation ahead of time to really maximize your chances. So when we talk about self-assessment, what are we talking about? We're talking about, what are your values, right? What are your sort of core principles and beliefs? And how does that impact your work, right? What kind of jobs are you looking for? Are you going to be happy doing? Chances are you're going to be more successful in a position if you actually enjoy it, right? If you feel like you're getting something out of it. And that starts with your values and your interests. What excites you, what interests you. And sort of focusing more on those types of jobs, tends to pay off. Other things to consider, your personality, right? And that's when we talk about personality, we sort of are talking about how do you work best, right? What kind of work environment do you want? Something where you're working by yourself, in a team, something that's, customer facing, a lot of people interaction, maybe you're more of a back office person, maybe you prefer to work remotely. All of these kinds of things are things to think about. Because this part here, this self-assessment is really where you're going to start to tailor your job search. You also want to think about your skills, right? What are your unique strengths? What do you bring to the table? And I don't care who you are, everyone has unique strengths and things that they are good at. And again, chances are those strengths. I'll say it. I guarantee that those strengths are going to that some of these strengths are going to be useful in whatever career path you choose to pursue. So these are all things that you want to think about. What kind of work environments and what kind of sort of company culture aligns with your values, as well as your non-negotiables, right? Your requirements, things like salary, things like location. If you're going to a job but there's an hour-long commute, that may be a problem, right? Or not. That's up to you. Maybe you have we all have other obligations, right? Things like school, childcare, doctor's appointments, things like that. It could be anything, but those sorts of things impact your schedule and your availability to work. Not necessarily bad, but it's things that you need to consider as you're looking for these jobs. And again, really doing the self-assessment on the front end helps prevent issues on the back end, right? If you sort of apply to a job without really thinking of this, maybe you even go and get an interview and a job offer, and then it turns out, well, their salary isn't really good, or their schedule doesn't work with mine. Doing this sort of self-assessment on the front end can help prevent that. And there are some good tools for this. I've brought this up in a few of our presentations right now, but ONET Online, got the link here for you that you'll be able to get after the presentation, has an interest profiler where you can go in answer questions about your interests, right? What do you like to do? And it'll generate a list of possible career fields for you. It's not meant to sort of tell you to do something one way or the other, but it's a place to get started. It's things to consider if you're not really sure what you're interested in. Because we are with the Ignite Hub here, I'll be using some IT focused examples. And for folks who are interested in getting into the IT field, the CompTIA website also has a couple of assessments that can help you, determine which career path in IT might be right for you. So definitely a few good resources. I encourage you to check them out. Comments or questions on the sort of self-assessment part of all this? Step one. All right. So first we have to know ourselves. Next up, we need to get information about the job market, essentially, right? And different employers. So, we talked about those non-negotiables, salary, location, and things like company culture. All of that information is things that you want to know ahead of time before you even submit an application. Unfortunately, there are a lot of great resources that you can access to help you find out, exactly this information that you need. So when looking up specific companies, you can use a lot of general sites like Glassdoor, Indeed, LinkedIn, and I would say the company websites themselves. Before you would apply to a job, make sure you go on the company's website, see what they say about themselves. Usually they'll be on their About Us page. They'll have something about their core values and their mission. Make sure that aligns with what you're looking for. You can use Glassdoor and Indeed to see employee reviews as well if you're wondering a little bit about the company culture. That can give you some insight into a company that you're not going to get just by looking at their website. It is important to take that with a grain of salt. If someone's writing a review online, they're probably either really happy or really mad, but it can still give you information, right? If you see a lot of reviews saying, hey, this company's really disorganized and, management is terrible, that's more information for you to use, right, in your decision making. If there are a lot of positive reviews, great, that can also help. So you can use a lot of these websites to find information on culture, leadership, and in some cases salary data as well. You can also use ONET Online for a salary estimate too for your different career fields. So it's a great tool. Aside from just sort of individual companies, you also want to get a sense of the overall industry, right? The labor market. So again, using tools like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, ONET again, LinkedIn, and different websites like that. You want to know about the trends for your industry. Are you looking at getting into a field that's growing, right? There's going to be a lot of openings in the future. The pay is probably pretty competitive if there's a lot of demand for it. Maybe your field is shrinking, right? There's going to be fewer openings. There's going to be less demand. Or maybe your career field is sort of flat, right? Not a lot of growth, but not a lot of decrease either. And again, this is just to give you information. This isn't to say, well, my chosen career field is shrinking, I should do something else. Not necessarily, but it helps you sort of manage your expectations, right? It may take a little longer to find something in that field, or it may be a little more competitive. So, all of this is just information for you to know kind of going forward, right? And help inform your decisions. It's not necessarily meant to tell you to stay away from one thing or absolutely do one thing. So we've got our industry trends. Maybe we've got some specific companies that we've looked at. Then we kind of start targeting the actual, jobs themselves, right? So maybe we like the company, but we actually have to see if there are some openings that align with our skills and experience. And so again, before you even submit an application, you should be, doing a pretty careful job analysis, right? Reading the job description and understanding what the qualifications are and basically how they match up with you, right? Your skills and experience and interests. We'll get a little more into that, but this part's pretty important. And again, it can be pretty easy, especially if you're using something like Indeed, to go through and just hit the one-click apply for every job. But if you're not really doing that job analysis, your application is gonna reflect that, right? If it's not really tailored. So this is a pretty important part of it. So go through the job descriptions, see what they want, and identify the keywords. Any comments, questions on some of the research piece of this? And again, the more of this you do ahead of time, the easier it's going to be on the back end when you get to the interview stage and the application stage and so on. So preparation really is key for this job of finding a job. All right, so we know ourselves and kind of what we're looking for. We've identified, a career path potentially, maybe some companies. Now it's actually time to get started on sort of how we present ourselves, right? The actual application process. So, and again, I would argue that all of this is relevant no matter where you are on your, in your job search. One thing you're going to want to do is develop an elevator pitch. I recommend that everyone does this. And so an elevator pitch, if you're not familiar, the scenario is that you're in an office building, you get on the elevator, you're going down, let's say 5 floors, and who should get on to you, next to you in the elevator, but the CEO of your dream company, right? There you are. You've got 5 floors. You're with the CEO of your dream company. How do you sell yourself in those, in that 30 seconds to a minute that you've got this guy's attention, right? How do you sort of immediately grab their attention and sell yourself? Now, that's a pretty, that scenario doesn't often happen, but we do use elevator pitches in networking scenarios and, if you attend a job fair, things like that. You can also use it in interview as well. So I recommend that everyone has an elevator pitch. It should be about 30 seconds to a minute that explains who you are, your professional background, your education, maybe some skills, and, basically what you bring to the table, right? What is the value that you are going to, to bring to employers? If you know who you're going to be talking to ahead of time, you can even tailor it and say why you're interested in a company. But that's, in a nutshell, that's what it is. You want to be able to briefly give an overview of your education, experience, and, why you're interested and what you bring to a company. Again, a lot of different scenarios for this, especially if you are networking, right? It's good to be able to get that information across. And with this, you do want to spend some time on it, right? As you're coming up with the elevator pitch, and you might tailor it a little bit, but ultimately you want it to feel natural and authentic, and not necessarily something that you've just memorized. And we'll sort of get into networking in a little bit, but with networking and presenting yourself, I would say that sort of enthusiasm and passion often are more memorable than sort of giving the perfect pitch, right? That having the perfect thing to say memorized and just sort of delivering that in a kind of a rote way. People can connect with enthusiasm and passion, and that's what they're going to remember. So in order to have your effective elevator pitch, it does take some practice. You're going to want to go over it with yourself, maybe with a friend, a family member, until it feels natural and authentic. And the other part of this is, not only are you sort of selling yourself to other people, but, the more you go over your elevator pitch and really start kind of talking yourself up, that's going to give you confidence. The more comfortable you are talking about yourself, the more confident you're going to be. And, a lot of times a lack of confidence can be a real challenge in the job search once it starts to feel overwhelming. So first things first, even if you're just applying online, you should have your elevator pitch because you will need it at some point in your career journey. Next is your presence, right? So a lot of this is online, and I think we've all heard for many years of that companies do look at social media profiles and kind of how you present yourself online, and that's true. Right? When you're embarking on your job search, make sure you're aware of what other people can see about you, right? And primarily that is through social media. So, go through your social media accounts, make sure they're professional, right? Don't as you're posting things, try to think about who the potential audience is. And if it's something that you wouldn't want a potential employer seeing, either don't post it or, make sure that you have a really good handle on your privacy settings so that people can't, so that anyone who just does a Google search for you, won't see it. And I have, I've worked with a number of people, and unfortunately, I have had situations where people do, lose a job opportunity because of what they posted online. So it does happen. But more so than that, you want to make sure that um, you have a generally professional presence. It's not just social media, right? If you have a LinkedIn page, you want to make sure that that also showcases your experience and kind of sells yourself as well. So try to make sure you have professional photos and things like that. We can talk a little more about LinkedIn under the networking section, but basically the bottom line here is understand how you show up online. And in person, this extends to in person as well. Whenever you're meeting someone for an interview or a networking opportunity, dress professionally, right? First impressions matter. That's the bottom line here. And increasingly in the job search, a lot of our first impressions are online, either through a resume or a social media search. So just be aware. Just be aware. All right. For the actual physical application materials that you're going to need, at minimum, you should have a resume and a cover letter. Now, some jobs may not require cover letters. Some do, some don't. If you have one, I don't think it's ever a bad idea to submit one. But it is optional sometimes. That said, I would recommend everyone has at least a template for a cover letter so that you can use it if you need it. Now we have a whole other workshop on resume writing and things like that. But to make it brief, when you're crafting your resume, we talked about the job analysis, right? And that's really where this comes in. So you're looking through this job description, you're picking out the keywords, the key responsibilities. You want to make sure that all of that, or I should say as much as possible, is reflected on your resume. If the job is looking for a certain skill that you have, make sure that's, make sure that's on your resume. If there's a certain responsibility, yeah, go ahead.
So after you got your job descriptions, that comment to modify your resume or not?
Yes.
So much that job
Yes. So the question is, do you have to include everything on your resume if you're trying to tailor it to a specific job application? And the answer is no, you don't have to include everything. You can include relevant skills and experience. Depending on your background, you may have a lot of work experience and skills and all kinds of great stuff. But you don't want the resume to be too long, right? My rule of thumb is no more than 2 pages. So focus on what is relevant as far as the skills and experience. So if there are certain responsibilities that this position is expecting of you, and you've done something similar, include that on here. Now, what that doesn't mean is just going in, copying the text verbatim from the job description and sticking that in your resume. That doesn't usually like it might get past the applicant tracking systems, right? The software, but ultimately it probably won't get you much farther. There's a lot of little tricks and things that I've heard over the years. You copy the job description, paste it on your resume, turn the font color white. Again, all of this, all of these resumes and applications are going to be looked at by computers first. So that's you can't really slide that past there. The best way to do this is to tailor your resume. And yeah, it does take a bit of work, right? You're not just using the same resume for all the jobs that you're applying for. You are going to get a lot more out of it if you do tailor the resume. So again, without going into our whole resume writing workshop, the sort of two takeaways are incorporate the skills and experience, responsibilities as close as possible, from the job description on your resume. But also, you have to add that unique, you you have to add what you sort of uniquely bring to this position. And that means really focusing on your accomplishments. You know, let's say I'm applying for an IT help desk position, and one of the responsibilities is interact with customers, you know, over the phone and via email to help resolve technical problems, right? And one person just copies that straight from the job description, right? And maybe they have some customer service experience, great, but that's what they put on their resume, right? Well, I did assist customers, over the phone and via email with troubleshooting. And that's fine. But the person who then expands on that and says, I interacted with customers, I interacted with 20 customers per day in via email or over the phone to help them troubleshoot, technically complex computer problems, right? That sounds better. That sets you apart from the person who just sort of regurgitates the wording. So really focus on your accomplishments, not just sort of what you do, but what the results of that are. So anywhere you can add in numbers is great. How many people did you help? How many sales did you make? How much money did you save? Anything like that where you can really add that extra little detail is going to make you stand out. So those are the, if you remember nothing else about the resumes, tailor to the job description and really focus on the results of your work, not just what you did. And again, everyone has results from their work, even if you don't think so. There's always a way you can quantify something or add some more detail that will really highlight what you did. Comments or questions on that? Again, this is sort of a brief overview on the resume stuff, but does that make sense to everyone? Great. The final thing you can do here, and well, let me back up. Same with the cover letter. So if you've ever done a cover letter, this gives you a chance to provide more detail than you can on a resume. Now you do want to highlight some of the same types of things that you do on your resume, right? You want to highlight what skills you're bringing to the position, how your experience matches up with this job, and so on. But you can also include a paragraph about why you're interested in this position, right? Why are you interested in this company specifically? How will this help you on your career journey? Things like that you can't really put in a resume. The cover letter is a way for you to include more of that information and give the recruiter just a bigger picture of you, right? That's why I say it never hurts to submit a cover letter if you have the chance. The other thing you want to do, and I guess that would count as an application material, is get your references in order. And this kind of goes back to the networking a little bit, but at some point in your job process, you are most likely going to be asked for references. So, before you start applying, try to find, I would say, 3 people that, can provide you a good reference so that you can submit those names and information when it's requested, during your job search. Again, it's easier to have it sort of set up beforehand than trying to scramble and find 3 people, when you've got 24 hours to submit a list of references. The other thing you can do, and this is optional, but this is more for people in creative fields or IT is another big one. You can build a portfolio, right? You can create a personal website or other type of digital portfolio to showcase your work. Maybe you've built a website from scratch. Maybe you're a photographer and you have, a photo, album that you're proud of. So it's another way to really highlight your experience and your skills. Again, in a way that isn't really going to be shown on your resume. It's one thing to say on a resume, I built a website using, JavaScript that did X, Y, and Z. It's another to actually provide a link to that website, right? Where someone can actually see, what you did. So again, it's optional. It's not going to be for every field, right? But if you are in a more, I'm going to say creative industry, having a portfolio is not a bad idea either. Comments or questions on this? All right. So again, all this has been sort of the preparation phase, the self-assessment, the research, and sort of starting to create your personal brand and getting your application materials together. So this is all the preparation phase. Now we're going to actually start getting into the job searches. So we'll start with the actual job search websites, actually just submitting applications, because at some point that is what you're going to be doing, regardless of if you're networking or not. I think someone mentioned earlier, there are a lot of different job boards out there. I think Indeed and LinkedIn were mentioned. And those are certainly two of the big ones, but you have plenty of other ones as well. There's Glassdoor, there's Dice, which is a little more towards tech-related roles. There's Career Builder. There's Hiring Cafe, which is a new one I recently learned about. That's an AI-powered job board, which is actually pretty good. So there's a number of different sites that you can use. And I think they're great. I think job boards like this are very helpful. I use them myself. That said, the way I've found the best way I've found to use sort of job boards in your search is to essentially see what's out there. LinkedIn and Indeed do a great job of pulling, job openings from all different types of companies and putting them in one place for you. It beats having to go to 10 different companies and seeing if they have openings. So I like to use these job boards essentially as research, see what's out there. And if I see a job I like, I then recommend looking at the company website and applying directly to the company, not necessarily through Indeed or Glassdoor. I always recommend applying through the company for a couple of reasons. One, I think the response rate does tend to be a little bit higher. It goes directly to the company versus through a third party. And the other part of it is, while I find Indeed and job boards like that to be useful, they don't update all that often sometimes. So, you might apply for a job through Indeed, but that company's no longer, that position's been closed. The company's no longer looking for that. So going directly to the company site and making sure the job is still actually open can help you, save time and not, apply to a job that is already off the table. The other good thing is, if you're going to apply for a job, you should be looking at the company website anyway, and this will hopefully give you some more information beyond what's just on these jobs. So that's how I recommend, using them. See what's out there, get some initial information, but try to apply directly through the websites if you can. As you're looking through a lot of these jobs, and oftentimes there are a lot of them, right? We said, what is it, 34,000 openings. Someone earlier mentioned ghosting, right? So a lot of times, unfortunately, a typical experience might be, you apply through a website, you apply through Indeed, and then you don't really hear back, right? You don't hear anything about an interview. You don't even hear if you haven't been accepted. You just don't hear anything, right? The ghosting. And unfortunately, that is a problem, and I absolutely share the frustration around that. But there are a few things you can do to kind of hopefully avoid positions that are likely to do that. So one thing is to be mindful of when a job was posted. A lot of these job sites do show how long a job has been open. If you're on Indeed, it might say something like, it's been open for a week or 2 weeks, or it was posted 30 plus days ago, right? That gives you a sense of how long the job has been open. And generally speaking, I would recommend prioritizing jobs that are that have more recently opened. Now, that's not to say that a job that's been up for 30 days or a month or longer, isn't necessarily active. It could be, it's sort of hard to tell what happens on the back end, but it is a little bit of a red flag if, the same job has been posted for the last 6 months, right? Either the company's, not hiring for it, or they're, collecting resumes for the future, right? So the more recent the job opening, the better. Now, again, there are some senior, I'll get to in a second, senior or more specialized roles where those positions might be open for a bit longer, but in general, try to prioritize the more recent ones. Yeah, go ahead.
Is that a point where you're like, there's no point being past this long? 1 day, 3 days, 1 week, 2 weeks, at which point do we decide anything that is older than, let's say, 2 weeks? There's no point giving time.
Yeah. Yeah, so the question is, is there a cutoff that you should, where you should just ignore any jobs that are longer than, than a certain time frame? The long answer is not necessarily. Again, it can be a little difficult to sort of know what's happening in the background of a company. The short answer is I would say, if a job's been up for maybe longer than a month, you may want to look at some other jobs that are, that have been posted a little more recently. I would probably, if I had to say a cutoff, I'd probably say around a month. That said, if it's a position that you're really interested in, it's possible that it could be active. I don't want to tell you that, any jobs that are over a month you just shouldn't apply to at all. I'm not saying that. If there's one that you're really interested in, by all means go for it. Some companies do have a pretty long, application period. But so, if you see something you really like, don't necessarily let that deter you completely. But yeah, I would say generally a month or so is probably a good meter, a good way to kind of judge that. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay. The other thing, and you see it especially with some of these job boards, is scams, right? I think we've probably all, seen scams in one form or another, and they're out there and they are getting more sophisticated. Again, this could be a whole other workshop by itself, but essentially, even if you're applying on, well, let me back up. One of the strengths of Indeed and LinkedIn and some of that is you do have the possibility of employers reaching out to you, right? They see your profile and they might reach out to you. And that's great. If that happens, awesome. That said, some of that is scams, right? You do have to be careful. And the rule of thumb there is, if something is too good to be true, it probably is. Companies are not going to reach out to you and say, hey, we have a job opening paying $10,000 a week for part-time work, doing, I don't know, where you don't require any skills, click here to start your onboarding. That sounds too good to be true. It's probably a scam. In general, if a company reaches out to you and you haven't applied to them, that's a bit of a red flag. Now, occasionally, like I said, recruiters, can reach out to you. But again, there's a way they do it, right? It'll usually be an introductory message. They'll introduce themselves. You'll be able to sort of look at their contact information, the website, and determine if it's, if they're at least representing a real company. Again, you do have to be a little bit careful. Like I said, these are sophisticated and there are plenty of scams that pretend to come from real companies. But at least there are things you can kind of look for, right? If there's a lot of misspelled words or bad grammar, that's a red flag. So, due diligence. If Apple reaches out to you and says, hey, we've got a position for you, but the email is, jobs at
Apple with a 1P.
Right, Apple with 1p.com. Yeah, that's probably illegitimate. So again, this could be a whole workshop by itself, but basically if something is too good to be true, it probably is. And your typical job search is going to have a pretty defined process. You're going to apply, you're going to get a call from a recruiter, you're going to go for an interview, they'll make you an offer, that kind of thing. At some point you'll interact with a real person. And so if the hiring process doesn't really follow that, it's worth watching out for. Does that make sense to everyone? Again, there's a lot more we could talk about scams, but just the key takeaways. So the other part I kind of referenced before, but quality over quantity is usually what pays off. Again, you could go on Indeed, you could do the easy apply, and apply to 100 jobs in the afternoon. Again, you're not really going to have your application tailored for these positions. There's not really going to be. You're likely not going to stand out as being unique if you haven't really tailored it for these applications. So a more sort of carefully done, more thorough, well done application is probably going to get more responses than sending the same resume out to 50 jobs. Yeah, go ahead.
And then why apply, no, let me rephrase my question. Why are they using it? Because not all the jobs have that easy apply. So if the easy apply is there, that means that the recruiter or whoever posted the job chose to open it. So why is it there?
So, yeah, so I understand your question. So the question was, if we're trying to tailor our resumes and do that, why even use the easy apply button? And I will say, for me, I tend not to. I always recommend going directly to the website. That said, if you want to use the easy apply, that is fine. I would still try to tailor your application for that specific position, though. Some companies do recruit sort of exclusively through Indeed or places like that. And I would try to, I guess my point isn't so much don't use the easy apply button, but it's, don't send the same resume to a bunch of different jobs, in a bunch of different fields, because that's probably not going to yield you as many results as, a few well-tailored applications. Does that sort of answer your question? Okay. The other thing that, people bring up is some of these websites, I think LinkedIn does it quite a bit, is, they'll show you how many people have applied to a job posting already. IT help desk position with, Montgomery County government, 50 people have applied to this already. And that can be discouraging, right? You might think, why am I even applying for this job if 50 people have applied? What chance do I have? And, to that I would say, yes, I understand. From a purely sort of numbers perspective, you might be better off focusing on, places that don't have as many applicants. But it's not always a numbers game. If you sort of like the time frame, if you see a job that you're really interested in and you think would be a really good fit, I always recommend applying for it. Honestly, it doesn't even matter how many people have applied. If you're the right person, you're going to be the right person. 50 people could have applied to this job, but you don't know them. They could be unqualified. They could be just sending their resume wherever and seeing what hits. So while it is helpful for you to know, well, that's a good piece of information. Again, I wouldn't choose to not apply to a job you're really interested in just based off the number of applicants. And I bring that up just because I do get that question. Does that make sense? Okay. Any other comments or questions on some of these job search sites? All right. Moving along. So networking. As we said before, 85% of jobs are filled through networking. So your connections are a very valuable asset here. Now, when we think of networking, it can be pretty intimidating, right? It can be hard. A lot of us might think, well, I'm not really an outgoing, people person. How do I, when I think of networking, I think I walk into a room and have to introduce myself to a CEO who I've never met before and really, ask them for a job on the spot. You sort of get the idea. But that's not really what networking is. And it's easier to start networking than I think we often feel like it is. So the best place to start is close to home, right? I guarantee that everyone on the line and in person now already has a network. Your network can include your friends, your family members, your coworkers, people you went to school with. It can be very broad. A lot of times when we think about networking, we tend to sort of assume that it means professional connections, right? The network connections that are valuable are the ones in my chosen field. I have to rely on them. But the fact of the matter is your network is a lot bigger than that. So everyone here, already has something of a network in place. We all know people just by, through our daily lives, right? We interact with people every day. That is part of our network. And so the best way to start is to, start with an inventory, right? Who do I know? And I would recommend, writing down, writing a list of everybody. Again, family members, friends, everybody. Because you just never know, right? Maybe I have an aunt who isn't working in the IT field, but maybe they go to lunch with someone who is, right? And they can introduce me. It's not a sort of a first degree connection, but it's still it's still a potential connection. You never know who anybody else knows unless you ask. And that's that's really the key part of to start networking is, you have to let people know what that you're looking for a job. It's not necessarily asking them for a job, hey, friend, do you know I'm not going to ask my friend, hey, do you know a place where I can get hired? If they do, great, but that's kind of unlikely. What's likely to get better results to say, hey, I'm looking for a job in IT. If you ever come across any opportunities like that, let me know. Or if you meet anyone who's in that field, let me know. I'd love an introduction. So you can start small, you can start close to home, and kind of work outward. That's the best place to start for networking. In our increasingly online kind of job search, platforms like LinkedIn and things like that are often helpful. I do recommend that people have a LinkedIn. It is a good networking tool. You don't necessarily need to be posting all the time or interacting with people every day on it. If you like to, that's great. Some people are very active. But at minimum, make sure you have a professional presence on LinkedIn, showing your experience and skills. Even if you're not interacting with anyone else, there's always a chance that recruiters can reach out. That said, I would recommend that people make as many connections as you can on LinkedIn, because again, you just never know, who knows what, who knows who else. And in addition to making those connections, you can also join groups and things like that. If you're a graduate of Montgomery College, you can go on LinkedIn and join the Montgomery College alumni group, right? If you're interested in IT, you could join I'm going to make it up, but Maryland Cybersecurity Practitioners Group. You can, even if you don't know someone in your chosen field or at your chosen company, you can still be in the spaces where you can meet those people. So sort of bare minimum for LinkedIn, have a professional presence, and find a few groups that you can join and get some information through that. Again, LinkedIn can be a whole workshop by itself, but I recommend that everyone has one, and that you keep an eye on it as a source for information. Informational interviews are another great networking tool. Now, when we think of interviews, we think trying out for a job, right? We go in and have to kind of sell ourselves, and the company will decide whether to hire us or not. Informational interviews are for our benefit, not necessarily for a company or another person. Informational interviews are just that, informational. Your goal isn't necessarily to get a job or get an in. You're there to get information. So maybe you sit down and have coffee with someone who's working in your dream company. You can ask them, hey, how did you get your start in the company? What kind of skills is the company looking for? What's your experience here? It's getting that information, right? You can ask about skills, day-to-day responsibilities, company culture. And by framing it in that sort of informational conversation, there's, the pressure is off, right? You're not asking someone to give you a referral or give you a job. The other person feels less pressured. Could an informational interview lead to a referral? Sure. It's great if it does, but primarily this is just about getting information and essentially knowing who is in that space, right? Whether it's a company or a certain career field. And again, you can have informational interviews with a lot of different people. It doesn't just have to be someone in your dream company. It can be someone who's working in your field. It could be a professor, a teacher, anything like that. So, part of your inventory as you're kind of going through people that also try to think about, okay, who is, what are the questions I have about this career field, and who on this list might be able to answer them, or put me in touch with someone who can answer them. And of course, you can't do everything online. So attending events in person or virtual, virtual is fine too, but try to attend events, things like career fairs, hiring events, networking events, right? Industry conferences, professional associations, anything like that are always good ways to make connections. In fact, the fact that everyone is here today, right, whether you're here virtually or in person, this is a networking opportunity. You are involved in Ignite Hub by virtue of coming, joining this workshop, and there are a wealth of resources, right? So, in coming to this workshop, you're interacting with people who are going through exactly what you're doing, right? You're looking for guidance on your job search. So, really any kind of event like this can be considered a networking event. But yeah, keep your eyes out for career fairs. If there are specific networking events it could be a chosen career field, it could be, an alumni group like we mentioned, anything like that. Try to attend as much as possible and really, really get into those spaces. That's what's really going to help. Eventbrite I've found is a pretty decent resource for that. You can look up and see what types of events are in the area, and attend those if you can. If you're connected with Montgomery College, they have regular hiring events, which I often recommend. And if you're familiar with WorkSource Montgomery, which is the county's workforce development agency, they also have plenty of informational events and job fairs as well. So I would recommend doing that as much as possible. And even if you're going to a job fair and you don't really see any employers that you're interested in, or this isn't really your thing, it's still not a bad idea to go if you can, because it's all practice, right? You're practicing putting yourself out there. You're practicing presenting yourself. And even if you don't come away with any leads, you're still that much more confident, right? It takes the pressure off a little bit. Starting with a list, that's of people that's sort of close to you and kind of working outward. Having a presence on LinkedIn and some of these other, networking websites. Figuring out opportunities for informational interviews and looking for opportunities to events. These are all good steps that you can use to build and expand your network. Now, it is easier said than done. A lot of times this is pretty intimidating, but if you're starting with friends and family, that can take some of the pressure off. Comments or questions on networking and some of the ways to start? Okay. Now this is getting a little farther into the job search, with interview preparation, but this all applies to sort of the networking space as well. These are all things that you're going to want to think about. And part of the job search is planning for what's next, right? After I submit that application, what happens next? And usually what happens next is an interview, So again, without going too deep into detail, here are a few things that you should be thinking about as you're going through your job search, right? You want to make sure you're selling yourself, right? This first one, preparing strategic answers, is essentially your elevator pitch, right? What are a few skills or experiences that you want to highlight that match the jobs you're looking for, right? What do you want people to leave a conversation with you knowing about you, right? So make sure you practice that. You want to think about, common interview questions, right? Why am I interested in this company? Why would I be a good fit for this role? And, what are some experiences that I want to highlight? You can even research, different potential interview questions for different career fields. So, it's all a little bit different, but minimum, I would think about answers to common questions. So tell me about yourself. Why do you want to work here? What makes you a good fit? And be ready to sort of talk about your experience. Another question a lot of people get either in an interview or on an application is your salary, right? What are your salary requirements? And beyond having an answer for the application, the deeper idea here is you want to know your worth, right? Knowing your worth is the only way that you're going to be able to sort of market yourself effectively and negotiate effectively if you do get a job offer. So if you've worked in the field and have some idea of salary, great, you can use that. But if you're not sure where to start with salary, again, there's a lot of resources like Glassdoor, ONET, things like that can give you can give you at least an estimate or a range of what you could be asking for a job opportunity. Again, based on skills and experience. It does vary a little bit, but have a, have a number in mind, or at least a range. I always recommend that people use a range, right? Instead of saying I want, $45,000, I would say maybe, give them a range of 43 to 47, right? It gives a little more wiggle room there. But make sure you understand what you're worth. And again, more of that, when you're thinking about sort of what you're worth, then you have to justify it, right? And being able to justify it really makes you think about, okay, here's what I'm bringing to the table. Here's why they should be giving me what I'm asking for. So it's all about sort of advocating for yourself. Knowing your worth is really about, being confident in advocating for yourself. You also want to follow up professionally. And again, this isn't just for job interviews. This is for any sort of networking event as well. When possible, or job application, when possible, try to send a personalized thank you note. Ideally within 24 hours, but if you don't get around to it, a day or two is probably okay. I would recommend 24 hours if possible. And again, you just want to make sure that they remember you. If you're in a job interview and the same recruiter is interviewing, 5 other people that day, you want to make sure that you stand out. And most people don't send thank you notes. So, just reiterate, thank them for their time in interviewing you, and just remind them about why you're a good fit for the role, and why you're interested in it for it. That can really pay off. I think recruiters do tend to remember when people send them thank you notes. Same with networking events, right? Hey, it was great to meet you at this event. I'd love to talk with you more. I think my skills would be a great fit for your company. Can we sit down sometime and talk? Things like that. So always try to get in the habit of doing thank you notes where possible. Usually after an interview or a networking event, you are going to have some contact information for a person, which makes it easy. In some cases, if you apply, it's a little harder, right? Some of these larger companies don't really have a direct line to HR. And maybe that's where LinkedIn comes in. Maybe you can find a hiring manager on LinkedIn. But where possible, try to send a personalized thank you note so that they remember you. Comments or questions on this? Again, interview preparation is a whole nother workshop which we'll be doing, but these are the highlights. All right. So we've sort of talked about the mechanical aspects of the job search, right? Self-assessment, the research, putting together, resumes and sort of networking strategies and things like that. But now we're getting more towards like the personal side. How do you sort of keep yourself motivated, right? This is a whole process. It can feel overwhelming. So how do you how do you stay motivated throughout this whole process? Because that's really what's going to help you succeed, right? If you're able to put in the time and the commitment, you're much more likely to get responses than if you're kind of doing it half-heartedly. And again, it is overwhelming. It can be overwhelming. So motivation is the key. And like we talked about, you do want to treat this like a job, which means coming up with a routine, right? Schedule dedicated time blocks, every week with specific goals, right? On Monday, I'm going to submit 5 job applications. On Tuesday, I'm going to update my LinkedIn profile. Wednesday, I have a networking event, right? Try to get into a routine where you do set aside a specific amount of time, ideally every day, to do some kind of job-related activity. It doesn't all have to be applying for applications or networking. In fact, you should probably, vary it up a little bit. But you should always try to do, something every day. This could also include skill building, right? Learning a new skill is just as much a part of this as, doing an application. So there's a lot of stuff you can do in a week that will help you, move toward your job goal. But you do have to treat it like a job, and like a job, set aside time when you are going to be working on this without distractions. It always helps to keep detailed records. If you're applying to a lot of different jobs, it can be hard to keep track, right? And the last thing you want is for, a job you applied for 2 months ago and have forgotten about to call you and say, hey, we'd like to interview you. And, suddenly you're caught by surprise. And, so keep a detailed record of all the places you've applied to, what the positions are, if you were able to make a contact there, write all of that down, right? Any sort of networking, you want to be collecting, contact information, have a calendar for any interviews you have coming up. Keep it organized like you would for, for a job, for how you would keep information organized if you were, if you were working a job. That can help quite a bit. And stay flexible, right? You want to have that commitment, but things change, right? You want to be adaptable. It can be hard. Everyone's job search looks different. Everyone is different. They bring, different things to the table. So, if you find that your current strategies aren't working, always be assessing, hey, what can I be doing differently? If I'm just applying online and not really, hearing back, maybe I need to focus a little more on the networking. Or, I'm applying, I'm getting interviews, but not really making it past the interview portion. Maybe I need to, practice more questions, things like that. So always kind of be reassessing and be willing to adjust your approach, based on feedback. And again, it can take a while. The average job search it depends, take, anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And again, everyone's different. It can take longer, it can be shorter, but I would say that's a pretty good average. So staying consistent and sort of maintaining that positive mindset, being resilient, is what's going to kind of set you apart from everyone else. When we talk about, the job search, I like to use the phrase emotional roller coaster, and again, it's you start out, you're optimistic, you've submitted a lot of applications, you're feeling pretty good, you maybe get an interview, and then maybe you don't hear back, right? Or you get some rejections, and where you're up here and excited, maybe you start to go down a little bit, right? Your motivation, it's a little it's harder to stay motivated, you get discouraged, and then you get another interview and up you go again, right? So it is very much an up and down kind of emotional cycle a lot of times. So again, just a few more tips that you can do to kind of stay positive, during what can be a stressful process. And the first thing is to understand the process, right? To manage your expectations, understand that it will take, a little while. You may not hear back, some companies may not reply to you for a bit, just understand it's going to take time and, kind of understand the effort that you're going to need to put in. Companies may not reply immediately, so don't get discouraged if you don't hear anything within a week, within the first week after you've applied. You want to focus on what you can control, right? Everything we talked about today are things that you can control, how you present yourself, what kind of application materials you submit, how you're networking. Those are all things that you can control in your job search. Whether or not a company responds to you or gives you an interview or a job offer, that you can't control that, right? And so focusing on that and sort of using the things that you can't control as a metric of success, can get kind of discouraging because, there's nothing you can really do about that. So, you're going to have a lot easier time staying positive if you focus on what you can control. Put the best resume forward you can, try to come up with the best elevator pitch you can, try to attend networking events. Those are all things you can do. And if you use that as your sort of metric for success rather than, well, a company hasn't called me back, you're going to feel better. Is ghosting, frustration? Yes, but it's not your fault, right? That's not something that you can sort of blame yourself for, right? Part of this is also, like any job, we don't work 24/7. We need breaks. So part of this process, I know I've talked a lot about what you need to do and all the work that needs to go into it, but part of this is also focusing on yourself, right? We can't go 100% all the time. So, within that weekly schedule, find time to take breaks and do things for yourself, right? You have to be refreshed. That's the only way that you're going to be able to maintain that energy to keep moving forward and putting your best self forward. So, work in some personal, time and personal activities into your schedule as well, and try to get in the routine of doing that. Reward yourself. Maybe you haven't heard back about a recent application, but you've submitted 5 other applications and attended a networking event. That's something you can reward yourself for. So, take care of yourself as well is the bottom line. The other part of it is, find support. You're not alone. I hazard a guess that everyone, who's attending here today is engaged in their own job search process, and there's a community here, right? So just the fact that everyone is here today shows us that we are not alone. It can be other people who are, it can be other job seekers, it can be friends or family who are in your corner and can encourage you. But whatever it is, find a support network. The support network is just as important as the sort of professional networking network, I would say. There's probably some overlap there too. But, try to find support and someone you can, or people that you can talk to. Because it can be frustrating and lonely to try to do this all ourselves. Don't take rejection personally. I know that can be pretty hard, especially if you get a lot of them. But, unfortunately, the fact of the matter is, once we submit our applications, we really don't know what happens in the background, right? Once it goes to a company, a lot of times we really don't know what's going on back there. So sure, you could be rejected because you don't meet the qualifications, but it's also just as likely that they had an internal hire who they were already who was already going to get the position, or maybe due to budget constraints, the company decided to not fill the position with anyone. There's all sorts of things going on in the background that could that can be reasons for why you're not hearing back or why you're not getting a job. So don't take it's frustrating, but you can't take the rejection personally, because chances are it has nothing to do with you. Keep doing the best you can and try to get feedback, but you can't let that sort of dictate who you are, right? You can't let a rejection from someone else demotivate you or sort of make you question your worth, because that's not it. Again, only focus on what you can control. And finally, always look out for new opportunities. Just because you never know what you're going to find. We sort of talked about this with networking. Talk to everybody. Maybe try volunteering. Again, you never know. Volunteering can lead to a job. If you're not having much success in one career field, look for another position that's adjacent. Anything like that. Just always be on the lookout for opportunities and try to be willing to say yes to all of these opportunities, because you never know what might come up. So just keep an open mind and be willing to try new things. Comments or questions on that? All right, real quick. I know we're moving through our time here. AI, that's sort of the big trend in job searches right now. Well, in general right now. So I've got a few stats here. This is how recruiters are using AI. So by the end of 2025, which is right now, basically we're in December, it's estimated that 68% of companies will be using AI as part of the recruiting process. And we've seen that already, right? Any sort of computer software that scans your resume and things like that, that's AI. So some of this is already been going on for a while, but more companies are going to be using AI. 82% of companies will use AI to review resumes. Again, that's pretty common, but this is why we talk about why it's so important to tailor your resume to get it through that first AI screening, right? 64% of companies will use AI to review candidates. If you've ever had a one-way video interview where you have to respond to questions on a screen, something like that would probably count as an AI assessment. And 42% of companies will use AI to scan social media or websites. So we talked about that earlier. Make sure you're looking professional online. And again, this isn't meant to be sort of scary or demotivating, but it's these are the things that that we need to think about, especially with the sort of the resume part. Now, this is how recruiters and companies are using AI, but the good news is that us as applicants also can use AI as well. There's any number of tools that are coming out: ChatGPT, Claude, Copilot, Gemini. A lot of different AI tools out there. And the good news is that we can use them in our job search as well to make it a little bit easier. So you can use AI to analyze those job descriptions and figure out the keywords and then use that to tailor your resume and cover letter, right? You can ask ChatGPT to say, all right, what are the important pieces of this job description? Help me integrate that into my resume, or help me showcase my experience, highlight my experience in such a way that it'll relate to this job description. I'd say resume and cover letters are increasingly people are kind of using those as tools there, and that's great. Same with the job matching, right? You can go into an AI platform and say, here are my skills, here are my interests, what are some potential career paths or even jobs that might, job titles that might be a good fit for me, and sort of get some ideas that way. You can even ask, how well do my skills and interests match with some of these jobs, and sort of more on the research end. The interview coaching, it's always good to do, interview prep, and AI can help you with that. You can have an AI sort of generate some questions, some possible questions based on the type of role you're applying for, and also help you fine tune your responses so that you make sure that you're getting across what you want to get across. And finally, networking, right? We talked about the elevator pitch and using LinkedIn and things like that, and you can use AI to help with that as well. Now, you're going to be delivering your elevator pitch probably in person, but you can use AI to help you draft an elevator pitch, or a summary, or some messages on LinkedIn, things like that. So AI is a tool for all of, potentially for all of this. Has anyone used any AI tools for their job search at all?
We tried to literally integrated with all those websites and you will look at a job description, it will automatically tell you based on if you have a profile. I'll take LinkedIn. You have a profile on LinkedIn. You open a job description, LinkedIn will automatically tell you how much your profile match this particular job description. So even if you don't go to ChatGPT or whatever, you are using AI, whether you want it or not.
Yep, and that's so the comment here is even if we're not using these tools ourselves, we are interacting with them, whether that's through LinkedIn and their sort of AI summary of job descriptions, whether you're applying on a website through like a little chat bot. Yeah, all of that is sort of AI that these companies are using. Absolutely. Yep. Okay, I see ChatGPT. Yeah, that's a pretty popular one, and a good one as far as as far as I can tell. But there's many options to use these AI tools. So again, this isn't so much specific recommendations, but more so here are some ways that AI can help you. If you're feeling frustrated by any of these sort of points in the job search, right? Tailoring a resume, practicing for interviews, creating networking messages, these are all sort of pain points that AI can potentially help you kind of work through and make it a little bit easier. Just some basic, best practices here. I always do like to bring this up. When you are working with AI, try to be as specific as possible with your prompts, right? Saying something like, write me an elevator pitch. I need an elevator pitch for showing that I'm interested in an IT help desk position. That is a prompt, and I'm sure ChatGPT or whatever can give you one, but that's not very specific, right? A better prompt would be something along the lines of, I need an elevator pitch, because I'm going for an IT help desk position. I have 3 years of experience in customer service and an associate's degree in computer science, right? You're giving it more information to work with. The more specific you are, the more tailored it's going to be. So try to be as specific as possible. You always want to review the outputs that AI gives you. It is certainly not perfect. I'm sure we've all heard stories about mistakes that AI has made. It does tend to make up information sometimes, right? Hallucinate. So make sure that any information that you're getting from AI is accurate. Try to make sure you're checking the sources, right? Where is it getting this information from? If you're asking it to tailor your resume, go through that and make sure it isn't, making up experience or skills that you don't have, right? That's the last thing you want. So it's not just putting your resume in to ChatGPT, saying tailor it to this job description, and then calling it a day. No, you've got to review it, right? It is a tool. It is not doing everything for you. As I mentioned, there's any number of AI tools available. Just make sure you know how they work, right? They all operate a little bit differently. A lot of them are good for some things and not so strong in other areas. So just sort of know what, know what the strengths and weaknesses of some of the different tools are, and know the privacy settings as well. Privacy is a big concern with AI. So, just make sure that you understand how to keep your information private and not put anything out there that you wouldn't want, other people to see. Similar to being as specific as possible, when you're using an AI tool, you always want to provide feedback to it. If I stick my resume into ChatGPT and I say tailor it for this help desk position, and it gives me garbage, right? It makes up skills or experience that I don't have. My option there is to say, wow, that didn't work, and just leave. But if I want to keep at it, I can give feedback. Hey, I don't have this experience. I don't have these skills. Why is this included in here? Sort of work with the AI to tailor it more towards you and make it more specific. The more you use it, the more responsive it's going to be for you specifically. So provide feedback and really sort of work with it. Another thing you can do is have your AI assume a role, right? It's one thing to say, ChatGPT, tailor my resume for this job position. You could tell it, hey, ChatGPT, pretend you are a hiring manager and I'm submitting my resume for review for this role. Give me feedback on it, right? You can have it play a role and give you sort of a perspective that otherwise might be, kind of hard to get. Again, grain of salt, AI isn't perfect, but that's a strategy that you can use when using AI tools. On the other side, things you want to watch out for, generic information. If I don't give the AI tool specific information about me and my experience, it's going to, spit out generic information. As we talked about, we want everything to be tailored. Obviously, we don't want exaggerated or made up skills or experience. That's going to get, caught pretty quickly in the process. And privacy concerns as well. If you're putting your resume into ChatGPT to tailor it, I recommend taking out your name and contact information and any sort of personally identifiable information. Yeah, so that's a privacy concern. Obviously, any sort of incorrect information you want to watch out for. And finally, these are meant to be a tool, an assistant, and I've been saying this, but don't let the AI do all the work. It's not, sticking something into ChatGPT and calling it a day. You really do have to work with it. AI can't sort of do this process for you, but it can help you sort of smooth things out, if that makes sense. Comments or questions on using AI? All right. So as we wrap up here, just some key takeaways, take some time to reflect. That's the self-assessment. Understand sort of, what you want. What are you looking for? Who you are and kind of how that fits into your career journey. Do your research, right? Preparation is key. So know what you're looking for. Know what companies you're targeting, what career fields, how market trends will affect your job search. All of that's very important. Focus on network, right? On networking, be active. Try to build those relationships, even if it starts with your friends and family. And be strategic about applying, right? Focus on jobs that you feel you're going to be a good fit for, and make sure you tailor stuff, tailor everything for those jobs. So, it is within reach. Just focus, confidence, and persistence. You all can succeed. That's all I've got for today. Thank you so much for listening. We've got a QR code up on the screen here, and I think we're going to put it in the chat as well. If everyone could just take a minute to scan that and give us feedback, we'd really appreciate it. All results are anonymous, and we do use it to tailor our future workshops. So I do appreciate it. And again, thank you so much for coming out today. Now, before we jump off, I just want to share one more thing. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm a career coach with an organization called Career Catchers, and we are partnered with the Ignite Hub at Montgomery College. So in addition to these workshops, the Ignite Hub has any number of other great events here. If you go on their page, ignitehubmc.com, you can see a list of their workshops, right? We've got the career workshops, which we'll update for next spring. You can see information about their fireside chat series and their lunch and learn series, where different usually IT professionals come in and talk about their experiences and in the industry. So a lot of great events here that I recommend checking out. Again, this is a great place to start networking if you're not sure how to do it. The other thing is if you go up to programs here, there's a tab for career coaching. So as I mentioned, I'm a career coach. And as part of our partnership with the Ignite Hub, I'm available to provide one-on-one career coaching to anyone who's interested. If you're a resident of Montgomery County, we can assist. So things like helping you put together a resume, identifying appropriate job opportunities, preparing for interviews, career planning, goal setting, all that kind of good stuff. You don't necessarily have to be interested in IT. But if you're interested, I'm happy to meet with you and set up a time to talk about your job search. So you can make appointments through here. What I'm going to recommend is emailing me directly. I'm going to put my direct email right on the screen here, chris@careercatchers.org. The other email on the website is fine, but this will get to me directly as well. So if you're interested, reach out and I'm happy to set something up with you. So, we kind of did an overview of some of the job search strategies today. If you'd like to get a little more in depth on any of this, or you have some other questions, let me know and I'm happy to talk. Other than that, I, appreciate your time today and thank you so much for joining us. Our next workshop will be in January. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Oh.
We will contact you. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yes. Go ahead.
Are there particular period of time where the job market in general is more active? Like, for example, right now is the holidays.
Yeah.
I am assuming that it's gonna kind of die down for now until the holiday season is gone. So along the year.
Yeah.
Yeah,
for sure.
Period where there's more activity going. You should apply anytime anyway, but.
Yeah, so that's what I would say. Short answer, apply anytime anyway. Companies are active, throughout the year. But to your point, yeah, I think generally speaking, sort of the end of the year, this sort of holiday season, certainly sort of between Thanksgiving and kind of the, Christmas, the winter holiday, I think that does tend to slow down a little bit just because a lot of people are on vacation and out of the office and things like that. So, there might be a little bit of a slower response time. Also, depending on sort of how companies do their budgeting, hiring, maybe they might hold off on hiring at the end of the year until they figure out their budget for the next year. So I would tend to say that the end of the year tends to be a little bit slower. Doesn't mean you won't find a job. I'm working with people who have, started jobs recently. So it really does depend. And some of it is, like holiday hiring, right? Especially for things like retail, that picks up a little bit, that sort of picked up earlier in the fall to kind of, to meet the need for the holidays. So I guess I would say at the beginning of the holiday season, it picks up a little bit. Towards the end where we are now, it tends to slow down a little bit. At the beginning of the fall, when a lot of people are going back to school, and there are going to be certain jobs that, if someone's working a summer job and they go back to school, those jobs are going to be open. So sort of beginning of fall, I think tends to be a little more active. I guess I would say sort of the summer, sort of spring, summer, early fall tends to be a little more active. But again, it really does depend. And, you can apply all year round. That's not to say that, yeah, but that's been my experience. Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah.
So, we email another carrier almost like this. Is that gonna be the same thing or is there a new one gonna take?
Oh, yeah. So our career workshops are once a month, and that's going to be like this. We do a different topic every month, and we'll update the Ignite Hub website to show that. The one-on-one career coaching with me is more so like it's going to be individualized to you. It's just going to be us, and whatever questions you have, we can discuss. So it's more, yes. The one-on-one coaching is either in person or virtually. Wherever whatever's convenient for you. Our main office is in Silver Spring, but I work with plenty of folks in Gaithersburg and Rockville and so on. So, if you reach out and want to meet in person, we can figure out a location that's convenient for you. But yeah, all these that's separate from these career workshops, which we'll be doing once a month. Yep. All right. Any other questions? Great. Well, once again, thank you so much. And I do have some business cards up here if you'd like to stay in touch. Of course, you can, reach out to me through email. And yeah, I look forward to hopefully seeing you again in January.
So